am Jessica Chen, 26, female. I live in a small apartment downtown, a world away from the cramped suburban house I grew up in. As a physical therapist, my days are spent helping people rebuild their strength, a calling I find deeply rewarding. For years, my life was defined by a single goal: winning the prestigious Harrison Foundation scholarship to fund my doctorate. It was a dream I finally achieved, only to have it snatched away by the people I was supposed to trust most. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The dream began when I was a senior in high school. The Harrison Foundation scholarship wasn't just money for tuition, it was a golden ticket. It covered a full doctorate in physical therapy, including living expenses, research grants, and a guaranteed fellowship. It was awarded to only one student in the state every 4 years. Winning it was like winning the academic lottery. My parents, Linda and David, were always vocal about their support, but it came with a heavy dose of pressure. "This is for the family, Jessica," my dad would say, clapping me on the shoulder. "When you're a successful doctor, you can help us all out." My mom would add, "Think of your brother, Ethan. You'll be such an inspiration for him." Ethan was 5 years younger, the golden child in their eyes. While I spent my nights studying and weekends volunteering at clinics, Ethan spent his time on video games and hanging out with friends. His grades were average at best, and his ambition was non-existent. My parents excused it as him finding himself, while my path was expected to be a laser-focused sprint toward success. I poured everything into my undergraduate degree. I maintained a perfect GPA, led a student research group, and volunteered at a rehab center for injured athletes. Every choice, every sacrifice was a step toward that scholarship. My social life was a ghost town, and my only hobby was memorizing anatomical charts. The day the acceptance letter arrived felt surreal. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Harrison Foundation's embossed logo. I remember my hands shaking as I opened it. Reading the words, "We are pleased to offer you," sent a jolt of pure joy through me. I had done it. All the sleepless nights, the missed parties, the relentless hard work, it had all paid off. My parents celebrated with a big dinner. They were ecstatic, telling all our relatives how their brilliant daughter was going to be a doctor. "We're so proud," my mom said, beaming, "our Jessica, the scholarship winner." Ethan just shrugged, more interested in his phone. "Cool, I guess," he mumbled. I was too happy to let his indifference bother me. The foundation had mailed the scholarship packet to my parents' house, where I was still living at the time, and explained the first disbursement check would arrive in about a month, right before the doctoral program started. It was a substantial amount, meant to cover the first semester's tuition, housing deposit, and initial living costs. I was finally on the verge of the life I had worked so hard to build. A week before my program was set to begin, I started packing. My small room was a chaotic landscape of boxes and textbooks. The scholarship funds were supposed to have arrived, and I needed them to pay my security deposit on a new apartment near the university. "Hey, Mom," I called out, walking into the living room. "Did the check from the Harrison Foundation come in yet?" My mother, Linda, looked up from her magazine, her expression oddly blank. "Oh, honey, about that. There was a problem." My stomach tightened. "A problem? What kind of problem?" My father, David, walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The foundation had to redirect the funds. He said, his voice flat. "There was an issue with your application." A confusion turned to cold dread. "What are you talking about? My application was perfect. I have the acceptance letter. I spoke with the dean. Well, things change," my mom said dismissively. "It's a shame, but you're smart. You'll figure something else out. Maybe take out some student loans. I felt like the floor was tilting. This was a full-ride scholarship. It covers everything. There's no reason it would be revoked. Let me see the letter." I threw it out. Linda said quickly. "It was upsetting. We didn't want to keep it around to remind you." Her excuse was so flimsy, so unbelievable, that a wave of suspicion washed over me. I looked from my mother's evasive face to my father's guilty silence. My brother, Ethan, was slouched on the couch, pointedly ignoring the entire conversation. Something was terribly wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their story didn't make sense. The Harrison Foundation was a pillar of integrity. They wouldn't just revoke a scholarship without a formal, detailed explanation. I got out of bed and quietly made my way to the home office. My father was meticulous about shredding important documents, but sometimes he was lazy. I started searching his desk, my heart pounding with every drawer I opened. In the back of a filing cabinet, tucked away in a folder labeled Household Repairs, I found it. It was an official letter from the foundation. But as I read it, the world stopped. It was a confirmation letter addressed to me, detailing the disbursement schedule. Stapled to it was a copy of the cashed check. The check had been for $25,000. And below the copy, on the bank's endorsement line, was a signature. It was my name, Jessica Chen, but it wasn't my handwriting. It was a clumsy, almost childish forgery. In that moment, the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just lied to me, they had stolen from me. They had stolen my future. The next morning, I confronted them at the breakfast table. I placed the documents in the center of the table with a thud that made them all jump. "I believe you have some explaining to do," I said, my voice dangerously calm. My mother's face went pale. My father stared at the papers, his jaw tight. Ethan finally looked up from his cereal, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "Where did you get that?" Linda whispered. "Does it matter?" I shot back. "This is a bank statement showing a $25,000 check in my name was cashed last week, and this is a very poor attempt at my signature, so I'll ask again, where is my money?" My father finally broke. He sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. It was for Ethan. He mumbled. I stared at him, incredulous. For Ethan? What does Ethan have to do with my scholarship? His tuition was due. My mom jumped in, her voice suddenly defensive. "He got into the state university's business program, but we didn't have the money to pay for it. You're already so successful, Jessica. We knew you'd understand. Understand." My voice rose, shaking with a fury I had never felt before. "You stole my scholarship money to pay for Ethan's tuition. You forged my signature. We didn't steal it." My father said, raising his voice to match mine, "We redirected it. It's for the family. Ethan needs this chance, and you can get loans. You're smart enough to pay them back quickly." The sheer audacity of his logic was staggering. They saw my years of hard work not as my own achievement, but as a family resource they could plunder at will for their favored son. He couldn't even get a scholarship on his own, so you decided to take mine. I looked at Ethan, who was now staring down at his bowl as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Did you know about this?" He shrugged, a gesture of such profound indifference that it cut deeper than my parents' betrayal. "They told me they'd handle it," he muttered. "It's not my fault. Not your fault." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You are all unbelievable." My mother tried a different tactic, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. "We did it for you too, honey. Imagine the shame if your brother couldn't go to college. It would reflect on the whole family. We were just trying to protect everyone." The web of their self-serving justifications was suffocating. They had convinced themselves that their theft was a noble act, a necessary sacrifice I was expected to make without complaint. They had not only stolen my money but were trying to steal my reality, twisting the narrative until they were the heroes and I was the ungrateful one for questioning them. In that moment, sitting at the table I'd eaten at my whole life, I realized I wasn't looking at my family. I was looking at strangers. I walked out of that house without another word and never looked back. I spent the next few days on a friend's couch, my mind a whirlwind of anger and grief. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, hard resolve took its place. They thought I would just roll over and accept this. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My first call was to the Harrison Foundation. I explained the situation to a representative who was audibly horrified. She scheduled an urgent meeting for me with the head of the scholarship committee, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Reed's office was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos of my life. She was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that conveyed both sympathy and a no-nonsense attitude. I laid out the entire story, providing her with the copies of the documents I had found. She listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she looked at the forged signature on the check. "This is grand larceny and fraud, MS Chen," she said, her tone firm. "The Foundation takes this very seriously. We will, of course, cooperate fully with any legal action you choose to pursue. I intend to." I confirmed, "But there's more. The money was used to pay my brother's tuition at State University." "Doctor?" Reed's eyebrows shot up. "That is brazen." She tapped her pen on her desk, thinking. "The funds were disbursed from our account at a specific bank. The check was cashed at a branch downtown. Your first step should be to file a police report for the forgery and theft. With that report, you can file a fraud claim with the bank." That afternoon, I sat in a sterile police station, recounting the story to a detective who seemed more interested in his lukewarm coffee than my stolen future. But when I mentioned the amount, $25,000, and the forgery, he finally started paying attention. He took my statement and gave me a case number, telling me it would be investigated. Next, I went to the bank. Armed with the police report, I met with the branch manager. He was a portly man who looked stressed, but he was professional. He examined the forged signature on the check image and compared it to my driver's license. He agreed it was a clear forgery. He initiated a fraud investigation, explaining that the bank would attempt to recover the funds from the recipient's account. The funds were transferred to State University's bursar's office. I told him to pay for an account under the name Ethan Chen. The manager's eyes widened slightly. Well, that certainly makes it easier to trace. Leaving the bank, I felt a flicker of hope. But I knew this was just the beginning. My parents and brother had created a tangled web of deceit, and I was going to have to pull on every thread to unravel it. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for my name, my effort, and the future they had so callously tried to burn to the ground. The next step was the most crucial. It involved a deep dive into the scholarship agreement I had signed, a document my family had clearly never bothered to read. Back at my friend's apartment, I pulled up the digital copy of the Harrison Foundation Scholarship Agreement. It was a dense 20-page document filled with legal jargon. I had read it cover to cover when I first received it, but now I was reading it with a new purpose. I was looking for a weapon, and I found it on page 17, section 9, subsection C. It was titled the Misappropriation and Fraud Clause. The clause was unequivocal. It stated that the scholarship funds were designated for the sole and exclusive use of the named recipient for their specified academic program. Any redirection of funds, fraudulent endorsement, or use of the money for any purpose or individual other than the intended recipient would constitute an immediate breach of contract. The consequences were severe. First, the full amount of the misappropriated funds would be immediately due back to the foundation. Second, the foundation reserved the right to pursue legal action to recover the funds, including all associated legal fees. And third, this was the part that made me smile. The foundation had the right to inform any and all affiliated academic institutions of the fraudulent activity. The institution that received the stolen funds would be notified that they were in possession of money obtained through criminal fraud. State University was an affiliated institution. My plan began to form, sharp and clear. This wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about ensuring they faced the full consequences of their actions. The next day, I called Dr. Reed again and told her about the clause. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "They really didn't read the fine print, did they?" she said. "Ms. Chen, you are well within your rights to ask us to enforce this. The Foundation's legal team can draft a letter to State University immediately, citing this clause. We will also send a demand letter for repayment to your parents. Please do." I said, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. "Send it to their house. I want them to see it." Within 48 hours, the machine was in motion. The Harrison Foundation's legal department sent a registered letter to my parents, demanding the immediate repayment of the $25,000 plus interest and preliminary legal fees. Simultaneously, they sent a formal notification to the Dean of Admissions and the bursar's office at State University. The letter informed them that the tuition payment for student Ethan Chen was made using stolen funds, obtained through check fraud, and was in direct violation of a binding legal agreement. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I didn't have to be the villain. I was just the victim, calmly pointing the institutions of law and academia in the right direction. The system would do the rest. The bank was clawing back the money, the foundation was demanding its return, and the university was now aware that one of its students was a beneficiary of a federal crime. My brother's brand, new college career was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in. Chapter 6, The Dinner of Reckoning. About a week after the letters were sent, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother. Her voice was a frantic, high-pitched screech. "Jessica, what have you done?" she shrieked. "We're getting letters from lawyers. The university called Ethan. They've frozen his registration. I've done nothing but report a crime." I said calmly, "The crime you committed. You have to call them back. Tell them it was a misunderstanding," she pleaded. "You're ruining your brother's life. His life seems to be the only one any of you care about. I replied, my voice cold as ice. I have nothing more to say to you. I hung up. The calls kept coming from my mom, my dad, even a few relatives they had roped into their drama. I ignored them all. Finally, I got a text from my father. We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow night, your choice. I knew this was the moment. It was time for the final confrontation. I agreed, choosing a quiet, respectable restaurant in the city center, a neutral ground where they couldn't scream and shout without making a scene. I arrived first and chose a table in a secluded corner. When they walked in with Ethan trailing behind them, they looked terrible. My parents' faces were etched with stress and sleepless nights. Ethan just looked sullen and angry. They sat down, and for a moment, no one spoke. My father finally broke the silence. This has gone too far, Jessica. Has it? I asked, taking a calm sip of water. I think it hasn't gone nearly far enough. The police detective I spoke to seemed to think prison time was a very real possibility for check fraud. My mother flinched. We'll pay you back, she said, her voice strained. We'll take out a loan. Just call off the foundation and the university. It's too late for that, I said, leaning forward. You didn't just take money from me. You committed fraud against a major foundation. They don't do misunderstandings, and you implicated a university. You see, when an institution of higher learning accepts money they know is stolen, they become an accessory. They have to protect themselves. I turned my attention to Ethan, who refused to look at me. And you, Ethan, your admission is now flagged. Even if they get the money back, do you honestly think the ethics committee at the business school will want a student whose entry was financed by his sister's stolen scholarship? Your academic career is over before it even began. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with hatred. You did this to me. You were always jealous. I laughed. Jealous of what, Ethan? Your C average, your complete lack of ambition. I was never jealous, but you were. You were jealous of the one thing I earned that you couldn't have, and instead of working for your own success, you let them steal mine for you. My father slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. We are your family. No, I said, my voice dropping to a steely whisper. You are the people who forged my name, stole my future, and then called me selfish for wanting it back. You taught me a very valuable lesson. That blood is not an excuse for betrayal. The Harrison Foundation has reissued my funds. My program starts next week. I will be changing my number. This is the last time you will ever see or hear from me. I stood up, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. The weight of their choices was finally crashing down on them, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a profound sense of release. The aftermath was both quiet and catastrophic for them. As I started my doctoral program, immersing myself in the world I had fought so hard to enter, the pieces of their lives fell apart. The bank successfully recovered the full $25,000 from the university. State University, in turn, immediately expelled Ethan, citing academic and ethical violations. His brief college career was over. Faced with the Harrison Foundation's legal threats, my parents were forced to take out a high-interest home equity loan to pay back the initial amount, plus the foundation's legal fees. The financial strain was immense, putting a visible crack in their already fractured marriage. Relatives who had initially called to lecture me were now silent, having learned the full, ugly truth. I heard through the grapevine that Ethan was working a dead-end job at a warehouse. His dreams of a business degree turned to dust. My parents were apparently fighting constantly, the house filled with blame and resentment. They had sacrificed their integrity and their daughter for a son who now had nothing to show for it. They had burned down their own family for a future that would never exist. As for me, I thrived. Free from the toxic weight of their expectations and entitlement, I excelled in my program. I made new friends, connected with brilliant mentors, and rediscovered the passion for my work that had been clouded by the betrayal. Dr. Reed became a mentor and a friend, guiding me through the fellowship process. It took time to heal from the emotional wounds, but every day felt like a step forward into a life that was truly my own. I had learned the hardest way possible that sometimes the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters can become your greatest obstacles, but I also learned that I was strong enough to overcome them. I had reclaimed my dream, not through revenge in the traditional sense, but by simply refusing to let them win. My success was my victory. My new life, built on my own terms, was the ultimate aftermath.